Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. I'm broadcasting to you from the Pine Hills Palace, just west of Orlando, Florida. I've got RDV on the line with me. He's from the great Midwest, of course, where it's a nice cold 20-something degrees. Here in Florida, RDV, it's probably about 50 degrees, balmy, very nice, very pleasant. And I got to say, we have a special treat tonight for everybody that's joining in tonight. I got a few notes I want to get out of the way first as people start joining the chat. Tonight's movie is Krull from 1983, and I fondly remember as a kid, a teenager, seeing this in the theaters. And it reminded me of several films before, which I know we're going to have to bring up with the comparisons because that's what this movie's about, hit or miss. And I can see both sides to it, but initially, I want to make a mention to all the people out there who've been tweeting recently. I want to give a special shout out to, as we like to call her from Dark Shadows, Angelique, who played the role of Angelique the Witch in Dark Shadows Revival from 1991. She is Lyssa in this movie, RDV. So it's kind of one of those weird coincidences as we
Oh,
said, hey, let's do an 80s fantasy film because we've been doing those lately. And so we decided to do this. And Professor Pixel and I on the other night, we're doing the Revival episode by episode review that she's on there too. And she made a mention about how Dan Curtis was a real big influence on her career, real larger in life sort of figure and all that. And that's really kind of cool, this kind of notes to hear. And I know when you review your stuff over there with Pixel and the Geeky Puppet Show, you guys keep a positive spin on things too, which that's kind of nice. So guys, check that
we
out if you haven't.
well, we do. To say we do try to keep it positive, but will point out if there's something like we don't like, but we also try to balance it. So it's like we don't want
Understood. Yeah, but it's not hate watch is the point I'm
to.
getting.
Exactly, and that's the thing about even here when we do reviews on this channel.
Yes.
We'll give you an honest review. No, there's a lot of crappy movies out there. There's a lot of movies I probably don't like, but I try to find the good parts and stuff.
This is
That's
a first watch for you, right,
this
Kroll?
definitely. I'm 37 years old. The first time I've ever watched this. I've heard of it before. Now I've heard of Call of the Conqueror, which I guess is a sequel or some other ripoff or something. It's kind of sortable. I think
It's
it was.
different.
Yeah, different. So I've never watched Crawl, but now I can understand the Wikipedia and how it says like the how this movie I guess was a flop. But 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 now take that now. Just because a movie's a flop doesn't mean it's a bad movie. It just means it didn't do well when it came out. This is a movie that's been received well since going on time. It's grown its own little cult, just like Willow. There's a lot of movies like this, and I gotta say, this movie. My problem was it should have been an hour and like 30 minutes. Instead, it was 2 hours. Like if you trim it down a little bit, I think it'd work a little better.
You've
Um,
mentioned that before on some movies, and it's interesting that you bring up Willow because I want to circle back to that. Also being a movie from the 80s, a little bit later, and we recently covered that here on the Extreme Movie Show. Willow is a movie that checks all the boxes. It does everything right. It's family friendly. It's wholesome. It just didn't grab me in a way. And when Crawl came out in 1983 in the summer, remember at this point we'd already had Clash of the Titans, which is phenomenal to me. We also had Flash Gordon, which to me is still one of the better campy kind of, I hate to say comic book movies because I kind of bash on the CGI infestation that we've had for 20 years now, and that's more y'all's realm of expertise. But for me, I, there was a lot of decent fantasy out at this point. But when this movie came out, you're right, it bombed financially. And what some people didn't like about it was the fact that it seemed very derivative. Everyone always talks about like the Tolkien walk and everything. And I wouldn't say there's a hard Christian element in this like you might get from Tolkien's works, but
mhm.
some people, writers or notwithstanding just movies in general, you might decide to like that or not based on your views. And we do have a worldwide audience here on the Extreme Movie Show, so we have great diversity of opinion and thoughts and beliefs. So we try to keep that in mind too. But what this does that does well, that I wanted to point out is when you've got a movie that has a big budget, we want it to look good. I think the special effects are one of the absolute pluses of this. It's shot on the Pinewood Studios, which a lot of the sets for James Bond movies are done at. There's also other places. And jokingly on the Dark Shadow stream that we've been doing recently, I always joke about the fog machines, just where they amp it up in the background to add some atmosphere to it. You've got all this natural beauty outdoors, and it's almost like watching two films. You're watching almost like James Bond Secret Lair, beautiful interior sets, or you're outdoors like riding horses and stuff, which is kind of
It's
badass, which you and I
it's
like. That stuff is phenomenal.
it's
This movie,
funny you
it looks
mentioned
great.
Bond, and you bring up Bond and like and all stuff like this because I was getting like gonna watch this. I kept feeling like, okay, where's Timothy Dalton gonna be like, from Flash Gordon? Because it had the same kind of like sets as Flash Gordon as well. Especially the end scene where they're climbing the castle where the rock, whatever,
Right.
fortress. And the way they're dressed, I kept thinking like, this is pretty much like, I'm just expecting like Timothy Dalton to pop out and be like, haha, guys, I got my sword and everything. Like, let's go. This movie had all the sci-fi fantasy elements you'd want to hear. You had a guy who did a comedy. He transformed into different animals stuff. Towards the end, he actually proved his weight. And transformed to a tiger. But also this story, because I think there was a reason why it really bombed, because of the fact it was like a Star Wars ripoff, and not only just the plot, but even the troopers, like and when they had like little laser guns, basically like staffs, but they shot lasers.
Right.
And then when the swords would clash, they had a broadsword, like and it would glow, it sparkled like red, like almost a lightsaber. So, but the music kept thinking like when they were in the beginning, I was like, I was like, man, this just feels like a Star Wars, like and I'm trying to remember who was the music guy in this. Was it James Horner?
James Horner from, was it Titanic? I believe he
Yeah.
did Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3. So some people I've known said, yeah, it's kind of sounds similar, some of the parts to it. But the orchestral score definitely, I think, adds a lot to it. Makes it seem very professional. It's very whimsical, too.
So when you look up this movie on Google, it's really interesting. You just type in Krull. Liam Neeson is like first billed, but he's not even the main lead in this. He is a side character who has 8 wives. He's a story plot. He's one of the bandits. He's a man who travels. Well, yeah, from port to port.
The seed is strong with this one.
Ken Marshall is the main lead in this, and every time I look at this guy, I keep thinking the actor who played Danny Rand in the Iron Fist on Netflix. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy could be like his father, like the same hairstyle, the same stuff. And I just kept thinking, this is like if you took Han Solo, put him into like a Luke Skywalker kind of role. Like you kind of switch him a little bit or blended him a little bit, and that's how you get Ken Marshall. I mean, you have Robbie Coltrane, which I believe is from Hawk the Slayer, wasn't he? He looks the same, but I have to look him up.
Robbie Coltrane's in a lot of things. He was, I believe, in The World Is Not Enough, one of my favorite.
Oh, GoldenEye. That's why I remember GoldenEye. Yeah.
Well, he was in 2 of them, but he's the one that has the concubine saying funky stuff. I don't know if it was Minnie Driver, the one saying the bubbles tickle my Tchaikovsky, and he's like, Bond, James Bond, come in, that guy. I'm like, oh, this is the same dude, because when you have an English fantasy film like this one, you're gonna get good actors, even if they're bit players, whatever you want to call it. And of course, yeah, a lot of people in here are young in their career. Even Lyssa, who's played by Lysette Anthony in here, model turn actress, however you want to phrase that. And it's amazing because, like I say, when movies are done by anybody outside American directors, fantasy films, they seem to have an element of realism to them that I guess maybe what films don't. And you and I have talked about the death of fantasy, about how you could have like Outlaw of Gore, and you get some really cheesy kind of ham-fisted sword and sorcery, skimpy ladies going around, and you might think it's a bad film, but you're like, well, it's entertaining, it's fun, I don't mind spending my time watching it. And the thing with Krull is it looks like a big budget movie. The effects still hold up well. It's a great print. I didn't even have a Blu-ray one for this one, and I'm watching it going, this is very striking. And come on, let's be honest, the spider scene, right, for example, stop motion and all that holds up today, even compared to a bunch of stuff. That's a friggin' good scene.
And the thing is that's the other thing. I'm comparing it also to Hobbit, because that was the thing on Lord of the Rings, where they had to go inside the cave of the spiders.
It's better than Hobbit.
I know, of course. Yes. I love the fact, and the spider is kind of like disturbing because it gets closer and closer, and like, he's climbing. Obviously, he's climbing on like. You ever seen those people used to do climb for mountains? You hold on one top of the rope and you walk on the other rope, the bottom. It's literally is in here, and they put like webbing on, fake like Halloween decoration stuff. But it's cool, and like, man, I give him props for you on that. I hope he had like a wire onto him, because I would have fell off that thing, just trying to hold on to that.
Circle back to your music thing that I was going to ask you a question about being a first watch. So James Horner, just kind of pulling up what he's got here now, because we usually kind of go off the cuff on this. We
Yeah,
don't really script anything. I'm looking at 1983. And some of these films you and I have covered here, and even though I like to say we're 80s based, we of course branch out and everything too. There's a movie we've yet to cover on here that I really, really enjoyed called Something Wicked This Way Comes. He was nominated, did the music for that. He was nominated, did the music for this movie, but he also won the nomination in 1983 for Brainstorm, which is the movie you and I covered, having
nice.
Christopher Walken in it too. And he's done Cocoon and American Tail, Braveheart, Avatar, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Willow as
Um,
well.
yeah, so it's uh, again, they spent a lot of money. They did the right
And
thing, which is
yeah,
great. They didn't cut corners like some places might do. This feels like a
exactly.
professional type film. It's a fun watch to me, despite the 2 hours, as you
The
say.
big films that he's done, yeah, that's why it seems so familiar because I watch Rocketeer, I love it. Braveheart, I love it. Mask of Zorro, Amazing Spider-Man, and this soundtrack kind of sounds like a little bit of Amazing Spider-Man, the intro and stuff.
Right, right,
James Horner is a great guy, and he could and he, everything he does is through it's orchestra. And that's what I love about some of these early movies. They use orchestra music. It's not like it's just on what you want to call it, a studio or a recording studio where they just have a few people here and they digitally edit in, and then no, like they actually can compose an actual live orchestra and then record it that way. So like I said, I've been this movie was a little too long for me. I understand why it's a cult following. I like Willow a little bit better, but I mean I can see why this is growing, and as far as people just love it. I mean, even Marvel Comics did an adaptation for it too. I think it was like 2 issues or an issue back in
right.
the day. Just like everybody in there, even got the band of it's like Robin Hood and his band of merry men. When they come across the guys, it's like and the one what's his name in here,
The Wise Old Man,
no, not the wise old man. Well, yeah, that was creepy too. Yeah,
the
no,
Magician.
Ergo, the magnificent.
All of a sudden, we have a beagle running around in a swampy woods. You're like, what the hell is going on here? And you're like, oh,
Well,
okay, I get it.
it's like even Colwyn overlaps with that because he said because the kid like he just lost he basically was apprenticed to the old wizard the seer, who ends up being killed by a changeling, and the kid's like, finds like, like, well, he was my only family like I had. He's like, and like Coleman's like, well, we're family now. And I'm thinking like the guy's like, yeah, sure. No, but the kid's sad. So Ergo, who basically he's a buffoon when it comes to like transform stuff. He uses all his spells, but it's unorganized. He turns himself into a beagle, and then just to cheer the kid up. I was like, wow, he's actually a pretty nice guy. We even get the Cyclops in here too. Forgot what his name is. Torquil? What was that? I can remember what his name was. I can't remember. Or Bernard Bresslav, played the Cyclops. But the whole cast. We watched Hawk the Slayer.
Right.
Like the cast works well together. They mesh well as far as like their personalities, everything.
Right.
Yeah. Even Freddie Jones, who plays Ynir, I kept thinking like this is old Ben. This is Star Wars. Like it's hard not to compare it to other movies. When there's so much similarities, and it's not a knock because if you can take parts from other movies that people like and put it together and actually do it well, I think it's good.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you. And I don't want to throw this at you as a first watch because you brought up immediately Lord of the Rings. You brought this up. I mentioned something called the Tolkien Walk. And just to take a step back too, just to be clear, if people haven't known of the film and they're younger viewers, or it's like, what the hell are they talking about? There's basically 2 sides that kind of don't get along, but they have a bigger threat at hand, so they're supposed to work together.
Yes.
So there's the quote unquote marriage between the two to unify and all this kind of stuff, and they have the big ceremony. Of course, when you have a lovey-dovey romance thing going on, you got to interrupt it and have a fight. And then of course you could argue tongue-in-cheek here that pure love is really the essence of this movie because that's what saves the kingdom and everybody in it. And tongue-in-cheekness aside, one of the elements of fantasy that doesn't really get talked about a lot with movies, because we think swords, sandals, sorcery, or the rules of the game, if you want to be an adult about it, or certain themes. I think this is a very family friendly, approachable film where even though there's action and some stuff in here, it's more of a swashbuckling type movie that's not really horribly graphic, but yet it's done well enough where a younger kid might be somewhat intimidated by the, say, the spider scene or CGI, or at least, back in the day. Today,
Yeah.
maybe not. And for the question I want to get at you is, there's a guy named Joseph Campbell that's always talked about the hero's journey and how no matter what culture you grow up in, the stories about your gods and demigods and whatever you look to, the stories that get told and passed down through the centuries in media, kind of go through a similar story arc. And so a lot of people with Tolkien would sit there and say, well, he put the Christian spin on it and talked about how it was England versus, say, other superpowers on at that time in the 30s. That's all I will say. And there's a Christian element to it. And there's people like Michael Moorcock, also from England, that would be like, of Elmer and Melnibone fame. I'm looking at you, Gerald. That would say, well, that was kind of boring. It was kind of wholesome. It wasn't really fantasy. It was really whatever. And Moorcock was more an anarchist. But a lot of writers too, especially the British ones, Jules Verne, everybody else, it's like they would write about different things and different perspectives. But if you see something like this in a film where you go, hey, this kind of looks like Star Wars, it kind of reminds me of Raiders, it kind of reminds me of all this, at some point, do you stop and go, wait a minute, aren't they all really the same story? It's just how they do it. Because I'm bringing that to your attention
Yeah.
because a lot of
Well,
people knock this film being derivative, saying, "Oh, they ripped this scene off and that scene." And while I won't argue, there's definitely some similarities. Every James
this-
Bond film is really the same. I mean,
the reason,
honestly,
yeah, and I want to say the very reason the Star Wars reference I'm thinking is basically you have the princess who's captured, Princess Leia.
right?
It's and Luke is approached by old Ben. Basically, Colwyn is Luke Skywalker. He's
Yep.
approached by by Yearner or whatever it is.
The
Yeah,
wise old resource.
yeah, yeah. And then they meet the scoundrels. They come across Han Solo, and yeah, and other guys, and they basically go to rescue the princess against the evil emperor. You know, So and like so that's and then you also the troops he has, the guards that are keeping a prisoner, they kind of look like stormtroopers a little bit.
Yeah,
Uh,
disposable bad guys. They're the red
yes, yeah.
shirts on Star
So
Trek. Yeah.
that's the Star Wars thing. That's why people are like, a lot of people didn't like. Oh man, this is just like another guy trying to be like Star Wars. And I gotta say, it's not a knock for me. I mean, it's interesting that to see something different, But like, even today, when people, I hate how people are like The Walking Dead. The troopers they use, they have, and some of these guys, they call, well, these are just stormtrooper ripoffs. I'm like, well, wouldn't you use hard, material to keep a zombie from biting you? It's not, it's just that we like to defend something and say, like, there's nothing better than this. There are diehard fans, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you also got to realize that not everybody has to share your opinion. You know?
Well, the thing with Star Wars too that I bring up because I joke on it when I was a kid, it was certainly a spectacle, but then so was Jaws, and the whole blockbuster
Yeah.
thing that kind of came out of that really set the tone for what all these tentpole franchises try to do now, and they don't necessarily care about the quality of film because it is a product, first of all, and I would argue that the artists and the people involved in it may care, and I guess it depends on your studio and all that. So I'm kind of superficially top coating everything. That's just how it appears. You have to make a profit or you don't have the ability to make movies. So I get that. But the thing I thought Star Wars did very effectively was capture these roles in such a digestible way that the mass market could kind of understand it, because people don't read like they used to. They don't listen to radio adaptations like they used to in the old school ways of transmitting stories. It's basically the shorter attention span and shorter movies. And it's funny that you mentioned, I wish this movie was a little shorter. And when I watched, I didn't realize it was 2 hours long because I felt it moved well. And of course, most movies are 90 minutes these days because of attention span, also to get extra showings in theaters for more money. But I had no problems at all with what they did. And you and I've remarked on it too, that a lot of the ninja and canon films and things we cover in the 80s too might have only been 90 minutes, but a lot happened in those 90 minutes. There's not a lot of fluff on here. Things really move. And Even at some point when the two
reason,
damsels from the village come to support their hero's journey on their path or like that, there's temptation along the path as the blonde was getting ready to say, I haven't known a man's arms or touch since my lover left me, and I'll comfort you, stay with me. And he like wants to say yes, but he doesn't because he's pure of heart. Some people might laugh at that and think it's kind of joking, but in a way, there is an element of wholesomeness to it, don't you think?
Yeah. Like I said, and yeah, I'll touch more on the Star Wars thing, and then I'll be done with that. The end scene where he throws the thing and he's using his hand to move it and then trying to retrieve
Glaive.
it. Yeah, the wave.
Badass weapon. Let's talk about that.
That's okay. Let's talk about that. He finds, he goes down to like this pit, where the lava is. And I'm looking like, what is he doing? He's like, oh, he's gonna reach in there. I'm like, his hand, like, no, because he's the chosen one. He's able to reach in there and not have his hand be burned by CG lava. And he pulls it out, and then it's like,
I like the fire effects. I know the reasons I like them.
I know, right? Especially the end. He's like, where she's like, honey, or his gift from Princess Lyssa gives him her firepower thing ability, and he, hold it, and then he uses it, and he uses a flame. You can tell it's a flamethrower when he whoosh, whoosh. It's like strapped to his hand, but you just can't see it. And yeah, he goes against the giant monster, almost like and like I said, describing the monster, the beast, kind of reminds me of like they used to do back in Legend, back in the day, with some of the CG effects.
Right.
Yeah, and it's not. I said this movie highly revolved around green screens towards that end part. It's not bad. Even with the spider stuff, they had some props there, but I'm sure you had some green screen in the back, which is okay. I don't mind that. So I said, so now you brought up the whole as far as like, it just, for me, a little slow. And me, I'm a high octane action guy. I love the chase movies,
Right.
That's my thing. It's like,
right.
So I know I try not to shit on other movies because I like a certain type, So your first watch for me, I gotta say, I'll give it an 8 out of 10.
Okay.
It's not horrible. It's not as a MJF would say mid.
Yeah.
It's it has its strengths. Like I said, it's cool that you have Robert Coltrane and Liam Neeson both in the same movie, and it's like one of their first roles, their big roles. Before they started becoming noticed. Doing movies after this. Especially Robert Coltrane. I guess for me, first seeing him was GoldenEye.
Right.
He was Dimitri or whatever it was. And then you had we had Rob Roy after this, which I've heard of and never watched with,
Right.
But for me, my first watch with Liam Neeson was The Dark Man.
Yes, another.
Yeah.
Neeson hadn't really broken out. I'm not saying he was.
No.
He was a starving, struggling actor, and he'd been on things. But another thing that I think is a little bit different today when we talk about movies and how they are, and especially TV, is that, like for example, Lyssa, the character in here, the actress at the time. I don't know much about her backstory in terms of what it was like to be a model and then turn an actress. Obviously, there's lots of beautiful women around the world. It's a different thing to be, say, a runway model versus a print model versus video. And Cindy Crawford is huge and popular. She was in the 80s, Face of Rebel and everything else.
So
she tried her hand at acting, and she put a lot of effort into it. Never really did too much more after that. And things were just different there. And your Coltrane example is perfect. Here's a guy that by the time you saw him, and from where you know him, your reference, when you go back here, think of how many years he's had doing stuff like that. And that's just movies and maybe television. You also have Broadway or off Broadway or stage plays, things like that people are doing to hone their craft. So it's kind of interesting you say it, because a lot of people only know Liam Neeson from, say, Taken. And you know what? We love him in it. It's great. I love the fact he got a second or third win in his career, because they were enjoyable films. But to me, when I think of Liam, I go right back to Excalibur a year or two before it. Again, British film.
Which I have seen. I just can't stand Lancelot. I think he's an asshole for taking King Arthur's girl. But that's
you can think that, but that's the role that he plays.
I know. So I have nothing against Liam Neeson. It's just that it's like, wow. So when I went into this blind, I'd never seen it before watching this. The narrator, who's also played by it's told by Ynir. I think his name is right. It's I can't remember how I pronounce it, but anyway, yeah. So he's there. We get this little here. It says, "A girl of ancient name that shall become queen. We shall choose a king, and together they shall rule the world, and their son shall rule the galaxy." So I'm like, oh, cool, because I saw the Wikipedia first. Like type of crawl. Liam Neeson's in there. Like, oh, is he the star character? Is he gonna be the son that rules the galaxy? No, he's the small-time bandit. I was like, I was robbed.
Yeah.
No, but and no, that wasn't a pun about your name.
Well, it's let's just say this: when it
It
came
could have been a
out,
different movie. That's what I'm saying. But this alone, they could have went a totally different way. But I'm happy with the way they went. You know,
right? I still remember. I think Siskel and Ebert didn't like it at the time, and some others. Not that they hated on it, but when you would get to know certain people, whether it was in shows like that or in print here in the United States, it was important because now we've seen with the review bombing allegedly that Amazon decided to hold people's review of Lord of the Rings because that was their own in-house product. They do all these things where they basically don't care about the fans, or at least their attitude about it. Where at least if you watch, say, Siskel and Ebert at the movies, the popular show for them, you would understand that if they didn't like it, you would know why. And they didn't seem like they had a lot of malice towards that or joy for certain films. It's just how it is. One preferred this, one preferred that. And it was cool because you went, well, if Roger likes it, I know I'll probably like it. Or, if you could get a sense of where to go from it. And the thing that to me that was pretty interesting is there's still a lot of water cooler talk with it. And now it's kind of fractured because everybody's online or TikTok, YouTube, everywhere,
sure.
podcasts and everything.
You
So
had
for these old movies to kind of find a footing again, like like we like to support her on the Xtreme movie show. We don't necessarily do all the mainstream selections, but we kind of like put them in place in some context with what's going on here too. That's why it's always interesting, like if it's a first watch for you or for our young 20-something guy, Professor Pixel, who doesn't know what any of this stuff is. At least you try to search out stuff and say, hey, what was this about or whatever. But I just never understood the hate for the film or the dislike, because it was entertaining. It's not spiteful. It's well done, and I know it was a bomb, but we've seen that with films. We've seen some great films where, like, man, I just don't get why it didn't do well. But then somebody might go, well, why was this so successful? And it's hard to kind of do a deep dive on that. But yeah, I would say for my final thoughts, it's a fun film. If you like any of this stuff at all, watch it. I still think it holds up today. I think a lot of movies today, I long to see a movie like this that is mostly practical effects, very little CGI. I could sit there and watch people riding horses, on some, side of a mountain or whatever like that, because they're on a path somewhere. I don't give a shit where it's at. It's entertaining. There's real people. There's real horses. It was a real puppy in there to me, damn it. And even the stop motion spider looked great. The weapon was cool, and it wasn't used 100 times. It was only used at the end, which is what it was supposed to be. That's how you do a story. And and I think your point about everybody getting along great, having a natural chemistry, that's a plus for the film. And they weren't joking, goofing off about it too. And that's the seriousness part to it. I like it. I think a young kid could watch it and enjoy it, but I think an adult could as well. Yeah, but they certainly aren't trying to world build or anything like everybody else does today. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'll say go quickly on the whole thing is Amazon doing the whole thing as far as trying to stop the review bombing. Review bombing isn't that great. It actually ends up hurting some stuff because sometimes people are biased, and anybody can use a fake account. That's why if you're gonna, I think most sites should require you to register, create accounts. To help curb that, because most people who are like, oh, they're too lazy to do that. They're not gonna want to register. Also, and like I know Rotten Tomatoes was doing this. I don't think if they what they're doing now, but when what was that, Captain Marvel came out a couple years back, they decided to basically well, I know they were deleting stuff. That's dumb. But what they should do is make it so you can't leave a review until after the movie hits theaters.
Right.
But I mean, now I guess now they want you to show a ticket stub, I guess, or I can't. That was rumored, but I don't know if that ever happened. But final thoughts on this though. This is a movie I would have saw like growing up in the 90s. I mean, I'm surprised I wasn't on TV. It'd been like I used to watch Super 18 on Sundays in the early 90s. I mean, or you'd see like you'd be going through the TV guide late at night, like what the hell's on right now, and you'd be like, oh, what is this? And they give you a little brief summary. That's all you knew. There was no like way to look up the trailer, and say like, oh, and so if you saw a trailer, you had to watch current live TV or watch a program, and not every movie got a trailer. Like only the bigger budget movies had a huge trailer. So that got a TV slot time. So like I said, I've been growing the '90s watching movies just randomly pop up on Sundays and be like, what am I watching here? And and now as I'm older, I'm thinking this like, man, like what were they thinking in the early '80s for some of these movies? like, I understand '70s gets a bad rap, but like '80s is like towards late '80s. I think is when we started changing away from a lot of the political stuff, as far as like population control, all that, environmental stuff, you know. But anyway, I'm going in the weeds here. I'll just say this: watch this movie. Don't watch the trailer. Just go into it. If you have to, watch it with a friend. Just know that Liam isn't here, but he's not a huge part.
No, he's part of the merry men of that takes some convincing to join the prince on his journey, and that's kind of what it's all about. So, yeah, you're right about bringing up some of these other themes, like the Tolkien Walk and Lord of the Rings and everything else there too. And I'll still say this to me looks better than a lot of stuff that we see today, and just there's something to be said for practical effects, even though we know it's a rubber suit or whatever. Even the weird stuff at the end. And what's that?
Did you hear about what they did for the actress, the Lyssa Anthony? They redubbed her over her voice with an American actress.
Yep.
Yeah, because they wanted to have a more mature sounding voice. They chose American actress Lindsay Krause.
Yeah, I don't really. I mean,
yeah,
things like that happen. It's kind of like Stallone with the Rocky franchise. He doesn't own Rocky, even though he wrote it and this and that, everything else too. And to this day, we know that that's an issue. So it's one of those things where the art of making a movie, not just the technical part behind it, but all the business decisions that get made for it, you're not privy to. And it's obviously like when you interview people on your channel there, comic book writers, whether they're independent or mainstream or not or what they tell you in context about how something comes to be is sometimes even more fascinating than the final product we end up getting. And that's just one of those things as fans we really don't know. So I'm just telling you about a movie that I remember seeing in the summer, I think it was in '83. Had enjoyed it. I felt it stood out being a little bit different than some of the other stuff, even though people go, oh, it's just derivative. Well, so is everything, for God's sakes. The only unique thing is the way you try to put a spin on it. And I think this is still entertaining. It's fun. You're not going to leave going, oh, I don't understand why they didn't do this or that. And there's the one last thing I'll say is this. There's definitely enough of a different touch to it because they do all this real stuff with Lyssa and they're running around and all these weird kind of European existential looking type of set pieces. And that's all I'll say is it's a little dreamy that way. Not on the level of Panos Cosmatos or anything, but it's interesting.
You gotta have like a respect for the guys who did the Cyclops, Rel. Yep. Bernard Brussel had said, like, you can only see with one eye, like a little hole, like and the thing. So it just made it so hard for him to move and know where he was going. He's mostly acting blind. So during the swamp scene, he had other actors had to protect him from walking into the swamp.
The guy who did this, I forgot to mention, was the guy that's done a lot of great stuff. He also did Bullet with Steve McQueen. So this wasn't a newbie sort of nobody guy. So I was like, oh, this is the Bullet guy with Steve McQueen? Because that's one I keep saying I've got to do on
special effects. The reason why I like it so much is because this is the makeup art on special effects makeup artist known for his work on Yoda.
The Yoda guy.
Yep. Nick Maley. That's Highlander, Superman, in 53 films under his belt, man. That is awesome. And that's why it just felt like I said, it kind of felt like a little bit like a Star Wars. You had like some of the music, and just like it wasn't like the huge march, like the Darth Vader march, but you could tell in some of the scenes, it was like that classic like '80s, fantasy, light melody stuff. Mm-hmm. Which so like I said, I love the music in here, man. I love the special effects, man, and like not the actors weren't bad. Like I said, I just think that it could have been dialed back a little bit. Now, Princess Verity says that she loves like seeing like more character growth and stuff in her. That I prefer in a TV series, not in a movie.
I mean, you never know with old property what they might do with or what they could, and I think if they redid something like this, I don't know how it would turn out. I think this is a movie that said, you know what, we're gonna just topically make sure everyone has their role and that's it to play. And if you flesh this out or there's a sequel, I definitely think you could see something like it. And it's good enough where you almost go, man, I kind of wish they would do something like that, even if it was like a Netflix thing or something, because there's enough meat on a bone, at least you feel that there is, because of how efficient and solid it is, that it might just work. And then a lot of times we get it and we're like, maybe not, right? So yeah, because we know the story, because it's a simple one that gets told, time after time, that it's not distracted by tons of, gunplay or this or that or whatever. The story is for the most part what's important, I think, and the characters as well. Because if you don't, I've always said, if you don't care about them, then nothing else matters, because you're not going to be drawn into it. And this does a good enough job of you going, yeah, I get the story. I just
Yeah,
know there's a beast and two bad people. But yeah,
dude.
with the characters, they don't they get their moment to shine a
True.
little bit, and that's it.
I mean, having 8 episodes or 10 episodes, an hour long, and you get to see more character development, more growth, you get more attached to that. Walking Dead, the comic book, man, it was like 169 or 149 issues or something like that. And little by little, I got like, character growth. And this basically made you want to learn more about the character, because the characters just had great personalities, and just the settings that keep going through. It just kind, and I love that once a week, or once a month, or every 2 weeks you get another issue. And just like it grows that like I just want to read more, and like, oh, I gotta wait. So I think that's sometimes movies fail from that, because they don't give you enough. But
Yeah.
like I said, if this would have been a TV series, I almost think it'd be a little better.
Well, and you would have time to do stuff like flesh out characters, because their
Yep.
moment to shine here, their simple role. I mean, it's just
Do you
like
know?
Star Wars. It's the
Do you
same
know what
thing.
I
You just
felt
have three
bad
movies
for?
to do it, huh?
Do you know who I felt worse the whole entire movie? It's the guy who died in the quicksand,
Yeah,
the one he couldn't save.
yeah, that's a good scene. The quicksand scene's good.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Southern Comfort has a good one too. And quicksand was popular in the late '70s or '80s, but not so much anymore. And damn it, we need to go back to quicksand deaths. Yeah. So anyway, guys, there you have it. 1983 Kroll. It's got cool set pieces. It's great outdoor filming. Awesome score. Some surreal looking sets. You may find it derivative of certain things. Maybe that's a negative for you. Maybe not. Definitely worth checking out. One of the higher spots of the movies from the '80s when you talk about '80s fantasy. I mentioned before, half jokingly, that fantasy died for the most part in the late '80s after Willow, but this is one during the high point where you had Flash Gordon and of course Highlander just a few years later too, which is a great film. We cover that here on the Xtreme Movie Show. I definitely want to take a moment here though as we close up to thank RDV for showing up tonight on this emergency off night stream here too, due to some outside technical issues I've got here at the Pine Hills Palace. My dogs, Daisy and Max, my German, Czechoslovakian Reds, German, two different countries there, are a little under the weather, and I had to take care of them. So I appreciate the short notice, RDV. But yeah, guys, we're getting close to 1,000. Appreciate everybody letting everybody know, that we exist. We don't really do a lot of formal promotion on here. It's kind of a hobby for us. We do enjoy it, but it's amazing that we have a voice. And sometimes when people kind of jump on the Twitter train or like in here, that's always the fun part about doing this, because we just want to talk about what we liked about it, put things in context, see where the conversation goes. And that's the extreme part to it that's really fun. It's certainly not scripted at all.
Yeah, and there's and plus there's so many movie channel reviews out there where they actually show you the movie stuff. I feel like it's more personal with if you're not showing movie clips, you're just actually talking about your experiences and all of that. But
Yeah.
but apparently we live in a world where you have to see visual in order to like get more than 5 seconds of view time.
I'm just checking the Twitter right here because I know you've got another stream to hop onto here. But official Lysette Anthony giving us a shout out. I appreciate that too, because she's like, yeah, I didn't look too bad. And everyone's like, yeah, you look great. You look fabulous. And it's like, well, of course you are. She was the Raven-esque beauty in here too. So that's always kind of nice. We get to hear from that occasionally from somebody that's involved in a production. That's always nice. And yeah, definitely worth watching, guys. Check it out. We'll check you guys next week
Yeah,
when
and
it might be Dragon Slayer. We got to confirm that with Pixel, but we're trying to keep to a few 80s, and fantasy's been the thing. So we might be jumping into that or Excalibur. We'll
And
see.
if you need some more crawl, check out the video game.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Have a good night. And as always, stay extreme. Yeah, that went well.
We're still live. So we're at the end.